We need animals to feed the planet sustainably. That's the driving force behind the company we spend time with today. But they didn't arrive there from a hardcore keto diet, savory, holistic grazing fundamentalism, but actually from being vegan for a while, working deep in the animal grazing space and caring deeply about animal welfare and the state of our planet, plus the social unrest if we cannot feed ourselves anymore. They went on a month-long deep dive into the general food and agri space and systems change, and both came to the same conclusion. In order to feed ourselves and the planet sustainably, we need to have animals to be part of agriculture instead of separated, like is the case now. And the biggest lever is getting more animals outside as soon as possible. So what's holding us back? We've all seen the benefits of well-integrated animals into agriculture. Managed grazing does wonders for pastures, biodiversities, let alone when you graze cover crops. Why aren't animals, mostly ruminants but also others, not an integrated part of agriculture anymore? This mostly has to do, surprisingly, with labor. Grazing animals properly takes a lot of time, often moving them multiple times a day. We dive deep in going from vegan to grazing and building a hardware company, and how do we enable more farmers to hold complexity on their farms? How do we use technology to enable complexity instead of using tech to make everything more mono, like we've done in the last 50 years? This is the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, Investing as if the planet mattered, where we talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities, and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land and our sea, grow our food, what we eat, where and consume. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. To make it easy for fans to support our work, we launched our membership community, and so many of you have joined us as a member. Thank you. If our work created value for you, and if you have the means, and only if you have the means, consider joining us. Find out more on gumroad.com/investinginregenag. That is gumroad.com/investinginregenag, or find the link below. Welcome to another episode. Today with the co-founders of Collie. They are enabling regen dairy, virtual fencing and cow guidance with drastically reduced labor and boost productivities, and Europe's first virtual cow guidance system. There's so many things to unpack there, and we're here in person, which I'm very happy about, so you might hear some background noise, but we're in a semi-fancy studio, which is a first for this podcast, so that's very, very cool. And I'm here in person with Daniel and Chris, so welcome both of you to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
And yeah, we keep moving around with our little chairs, so they might make noise, but it's really funny to do this in person. First of all, we don't get to do that very often, which we need to do more, and it's then very nice to do it. Of course, nice to do it on farm with all the background noise and the complexity, but it's also nice to do it in a soundproof place with a fancy mic in front of you. So that's a first. And I'm going to ask you both, and you can point at each other because that's the easy thing of doing this. They're doing this in person. Who takes which question? Who goes first, etc. And just full disclosure, first of all, we are a small investor with our syndicate in Collie, so I'm definitely biased here. And as I'm not sitting here as an investor wanting to know everything, how is it going? Because we need to unpack the story first. So let's start with that. And how did both of you end up focusing most of your awake hours on soil and everything that happens in that and above that?
So I actually have a commercial background, and in that commercial background...
You don't have to feel sorry for that. I feel a tone there, like, I'm sorry, I actually have a commercial background. I wasn't focused on soil. That's amazing. We need more people with commercial backgrounds in the space. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. So I worked for Greenpeace a while, and eventually during my commercial working days, I missed a bit of my idealism, where I decided to volunteer my time for Extinction Rebellion. And I would say at both those places, I've been learning about the food system and how crucial it is to change the food system if we all want to live in the next couple of years.
I'm amazed. I don't think anybody expected when you said commercial time, you went Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion first. So that was like, okay, people are like, you're listening somewhere here and you're like, oh, that's unexpected. So stay with us. This is an interesting journey. And where were the commercial years then? Because I don't think Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion fall under that category.
No, so I decided in my early days to never go to university because I'm a real doer. And I thought, what do I enjoy most? And that was, of course, talking to people. So I ended up in sales.
I thought in a podcast.
And from sales, I got into leader positions quite quickly. And from that, I became a branch manager for a company called Van der Bron. They do sustainable energy.
One of the leaders in the space here, or one of the earliest in the Netherlands. And they had this amazing website where you could click and you could select which one you want, which farmer you wanted your, I mean, indirectly, of course, your solar from. And it is very nice. It was one of the first proper interactive websites to pick things.
Yeah, great venture. Yeah. So, and there I found my love for operations and really like starting something from nothing, set up a team, hiring, training, work culture, the whole operational side. So I did that worldwide, also for a company called Nomad's Business School. And eventually also I set up a branch for the company we're in now, the Next Web. So that's my commercial background.
And very personal question. Has it ever hold you back? I'm asking for a friend, aka me, that never finished university as well. The fact that you never went to university. Like in pitch decks, I've seen some examples in pitch decks, somebody put like University of Life or something, like if you're next to very cool PhDs, etc. Like has it ever pushed you, hold you back, or has it ever interfered at all? Or in the tech world, it doesn't matter what?
I would say the opposite. It has helped me a lot because with many job applications I've done, normally you would say, hey, do you have the paper? That's what people expect. But what actually people are missing is the work experience. And that's something I had. I gained 6 more years by not going to university, you could say.
And instead working a job in a restaurant or something, and not super relevant for. But
I would say that in like writing an email takes me, I would say, a bit longer than maybe someone who did university and has been written a lot of reports, for example. So.
But now with Gmail finishing your sentences.
Yes, exactly. So I think it was a very good choice.
6 years is a lot. Yeah. That's very it's interesting framing. And then you were triggered on food and ag in Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion?
Yes. Yeah, because I really felt like if my biggest fear is not climate change, it's actually social collapse. And because, if we as people need to feed our children and we can't, we'll do crazy things. And that's, for me, very scary. So, and one reason we could have social collapse is if we cannot feed our children anymore, or we cannot feed ourselves anymore. And the biggest chance of not being able to feed ourselves anymore is because of the upcoming droughts, water levels rising, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm trying to prevent that with Collie. But that is the reason that during my time at Extinction Rebellion, I felt, okay, if I want to really contribute to changing the world, I need to change it at the food system. And that's when I decided to quit my work, to stop renting my house in Amsterdam, and to go work and live on farms, which I did. First in a nature restoration farm where they combine animals and nature. And then to a regenerative arable farm. And then eventually I worked in, I wanted to go back to Amsterdam to my friends again. I needed some impulses.
Where were these farms?
Yeah, so the first farm is called Wildlife, and it is in Drenthe. The second farm is called Botmaas, which is in Friesland, where I'm actually born and raised. I'm a proud Frisian. And the third place was MoMA Liquid Landscape. It's a company bringing dairy products to the streets of Amsterdam and trying to educate the citizens about how it's being made and how you can make it more sustainable. So it's trying to build a bridge between farmers and people to connect it more.
So much to unpack there, which we'll get to in a bit. But I want to welcome Chris as well to hear, because then your story. I mean, let's do one last bit of that intro story. How did you find Fresh Ventures? Because that's how we all met, and that's where you really took a deep dive. I mean, you were working on farms, so a deep dive you were already emerging yourself, let's say, in food and ag. And then how did Fresh Ventures, where you had been incubated, I don't think is the right word, but you were part of the studio, part of the first cohort, then part of the studio, and now an alumni, let's say, and part of the Fresh ecosystem. How did Fresh come to you, or you came to Fresh?
Yeah, so that kind of came after that, because I was now back in Amsterdam, and I had not only a commercial background, I now had a farmer background as well. There were two guys from a company called Wilderland, amazing company as well, and they said, hey, I heard about this program, and I think it's really something for you. So I went checking it out, and it was indeed for me. I really, there I could combine those two, because what I really like about Fresh is that they really do a deep dive in, hey, what is the food system? How does it work? And how does system change work? And that was exactly the reason why I went into farming anyway, but I missed that bit, like how can I actually bring about that change I would like to bring. And Fresh gave me that and brought me to Chris, which might be a good bridge.
You're doing the work for me. Perfect. Chris. I mean, your story travels a few more kilometers, let's say, or miles, ending up here in the city center of Amsterdam. So what brought you to farming in soil, and what brought you back to that as well? Because I think it's been a journey.
Yeah. So I grew up sort of in rural New Zealand. My parents weren't directly farmers, but I spent a lot of time around the farming industry. My dad's a veterinarian, grew up with horses, grew up with a small farm, small block of land. It would be considered quite a big block of land here in the Netherlands, actually. But
just for reference, how big are we talking?
Like 100 or 80 hectares, something like that. Around
significant. Yeah. Not a vegetable plot.
Not a vegetable plot, but just with beef, cattle, a few sheep, and some horses. I obviously grew up around nature a lot. Did a lot of hiking, did a lot of swimming in the river and stuff like that. Working on farms and all that sort of thing. I think when I was young, I became aware of the impact that farming was having on nature, for sure. I do distinctly remember one moment going to the local swimming hole, and there was two rivers joining up. One river directly came from the national park, essentially, nearby, and one river came past a few farms. And that river was brown, and the other one was perfectly crystal clear. So... And it made me distinctly aware at an early age of the impact that farming had on our ecosystems. So.
Which is a fascinating insight. I think I put a sentence. We just re-recorded the video course for the financial sector, let's say, and there's a murky river. I put a sentence like, that's your asset flowing away. And it's it's possible, but very difficult to rebuild. And then I want to, every banker, finance person, etc. If you see a murky river, upstream somewhere, someone is losing topsoil, and God knows what else is in that. But that's civilization flowing away, basically. And you had that very early on in a nice why moment, where the left and right coming to in a junction, and then coming from such a farming background, then what, or what happened? Or what led you to do that? Could be Extinction Rebellion, could be Greenpeace, could be something else.
Yeah, well, I didn't really act on that when I was younger, but what I was also, my main passion when I was young was building things. So I spent hours building tree houses and hay huts and all sorts of things. So that led me to actually study, I was first going to study architecture, but ended up doing engineering, which I'm very happy about. So I studied sort of robotics engineering. And then after that, I also ended up traveling a lot, and doing lots of strange jobs, but also getting into startups as well. So I was part of a startup, what do you call it? A startup competition when I was at university. Ended up winning that, and that really got me into startups as well. That company didn't end up going anywhere, but
as many startups do.
I learned a lot, which was great. And then went traveling after that and did all sorts of weird jobs. For example, I ended up working on a million-acre cattle station in Western Australia, chasing cattle on horseback, literally being a cowboy for 6 months. Then I went to Canada and did something similar. Then I came to Amsterdam and I worked in a startup. So kind of all of those things led me to this combination of skill set, which was like engineering, startups, and animals, which is what led me to my previous company that I was working for, Halter, which I think you've heard of, and is a similar company in the space to what Collie is. And
because what led you back then to New Zealand? Because the startup life in Amsterdam was and is buzzing. It's, let's say, quote unquote, easy to stay here. Not cheap at all, but you can. I mean, if that's that energy or that life like pulls you in, it's easy to stay here. And New Zealand is pretty far.
Well,
to start or to join a startup there, and that became a scale up. But to join something there, like how did that pull you back, basically?
Well, the intention actually of coming to Amsterdam was I was never intended to stay here long. I just had a 1-year working holiday visa. So that was, I guess, why my visa ran out.
Yeah, very good reason.
And I met a Dutch girl, and she was also interested in moving to New Zealand as well. So that was which is actually the reason I came back. And
then getting into the virtual fencing space in New Zealand, I don't think many people know how much more advanced it is. I think when we met, you were saying like on grazing, like the New Zealand atmosphere or the New Zealand farmers or livestock farmers or ranchers in general are much more advanced in grazing and embrace this enabling technology immediately. Like, just to paint a picture, what is halter and what is virtual fencing in New Zealand at the moment, and why is it so important? Because we hear this stories of New Zealand farming and we hear the issues as well. I think if you dig deep enough, you see the pollution story is well hidden, but definitely there. It's like what's the ranching or the ranching space now like in New Zealand?
Yeah, well, I think because the grass growing conditions, let's say, are very good all year round, right? So even in winter, you still grow grass. So therefore, you grow less grass, but it's not like in Europe where the cows have to be inside. Yeah. So
you have a natural advantage.
Yeah, because it's really like the perfect environment to grow grass. There's a lot of sun and there's a lot of rain, which is grass growing heaven. So from that kind of natural reason that there's been a focus on grazing from the beginning. And because there's a focus on grass being the biggest resource, people have put a lot of effort into how can we get the best out of our grass. And I think for that reason also, because, there's a lot of effort in being put into grazing, they were very quickly to take up virtual fencing technology when it started to emerge, because it was such a big labor save for them and value gain for them, and still is. But still there's problems with, as you alluded to, and hence why the river near me was brown, is that you still have nutrient runoff, you still have cows getting into waterways and that sort of thing. Not all is perfect, but there's, I think, a lot that can be learned from that style of grazing.
So just for people we've had some virtual fencing companies on here before, Fence, which I will link below as well, and No Fence, I think 2 or 3 interviews. But just for people that haven't listened to that or like mentally don't have a picture in their head what virtual fencing is, of course it's a wide variety of applications at the moment, but if you had to describe, which you have to do for sure 10 times a day, what is virtual fencing and why should we in the regen space care?
Yeah, virtual fencing is a way to manage animals, I guess, without the need of human labor. So by training cows, or not just cows, animals in general, to respond to sounds and vibrations, it means that you can guide cows around a landscape at the cost of 0 at with using a finger on your phone. But technically it works by training the animals to respond to sounds and vibrations. So a sound being kind of like a warning, it gets louder and louder and louder until there's a small pulse, which is a pulse that's much smaller than a normal electric fence. So
Very
it's kind
important to mention here for any animal welfare people listening. Like if a cow touches her nose against an electric fence, it's painful and very painful. That's why you see them sometimes break through or backwards. This pulse they get after the sound warning, which I think most cows is more than enough for most cows to back from a waterway or from whatever virtual fence we've put in there. They get a small pulse, but it's way less than what they would get if they touch the electric fencing that for most places we use now, or we try to use when we do adaptive grazing.
And there's a lot of research out there already showing that at a minimum, virtual fencing is no worse than the current status quo, if not better. And it makes sense when you think about it, right? Because you're kind of just reassociating a cue, right? So the cue now was before a tiny little visual line.
Very tiny.
In the air. And now the cue is a very clear sound that gets louder and louder and louder and gives the animal plenty of time to react.
And do you see that as well in the data? Like the cows get quote-unquote better or start avoiding like the louder sound and thus the potential pulse? Or like are there still a few that just, I want the green grass over there and I will get it?
No, it's of course you have a range of cows or animals in general that respond in different ways, and there's always kind of like a certain mix, a certain percentage that tend to push a bit more, but they always learn. And there's also tend to be a group that are a bit smarter, right? They learn, you know what, if I know that if it gets to this certain height, what's coming, but if I can just push it just before and then react just in time, I can get a little extra bite of grass, for example. So they're very smart creatures, and they can learn these systems, and learn to work with them in a very calm and easy way.
It's probably calmer than a cowboy shouting on a horse or fencing around with gets you into shocks.
And that's one thing that I always say actually about using technology to guide the animals, because I think the one thing they haven't touched on also is we use the vibration to guide the animal, so moving from A to B. So the cow kind of learns that if she responds to the vibration, she follows the vibration, she get more food. So more grass or more food in the cowshed or et cetera, et cetera. So they quickly learn to, if I follow the vibration, I'm going to get a reward.
So it's a positive focus.
Exactly. And one thing about using technology to guide an animal is that technology has unlimited patience. So humans don't have unlimited patience. Farmers get annoyed at the animals, slow cows. They actually scare the cows. They bring fear. They have their own timelines. They get stressed. Technology has none of those problems. We can actually give the cow as much time that it needs to do what it wants to do, or what we want it to do.
If you want to walk slowly, you walk slowly. If you want to learn slowly, you learn slowly. If you want to,
Exactly. And there's no need for that.
Which is also great for limping cows, or cows that have sore feet or problems physically. Normally, when you drive the cows forward, you go from the back and you hit them on the butts and you go up, 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 up. You try and then the cows at the back are kind of pushing the cows at the front, which is stressful for the cows. But also, if you have a limping cow, it's also more difficult. And what you see with our system, and which has amazed animal welfare organizations as well, is that they all get their own vibration. They all get their own time to go to the milking shed, for example.
Because just to explain, like the pulse you mentioned before is for when they go somewhere you don't want them to go, like they go into a sound which gets louder and louder, and then there's a pulse. And now you're saying we guide them towards somewhere with vibration. How does that work, or how should we imagine that?
Yeah, so where the sound is a warning, and when the cow hears the sound, she will move away from the sound. making sure that, because when it's louder, she eventually, after 5 to 15 seconds, she will get a shock. So she wants to prevent that. And with the vibration, she knows, I'm going to get a nice feed. So when she feels
So
the
it's not the
vibration,
same as a shock, obviously.
it's totally
No,
different. Yeah. And with the vibration, she will...
It's like your phone vibrating.
Yeah, it's like she'll get excited because she knows she will get feed.
Either super new, super fresh green grass, etc.,
Yes.
or something. And especially in milking, and we'll get to that in the dairy space, of course. So everybody has their own vibration and their own speed, because there's nobody running behind them with like a whip to get them as fast as possible to the milking shed or somewhere.
Which gives the cow all the time in the world to take her time, and also limping cows to have all the time in the world to slowly go at her own pace to the milking shed, which is of course a big enhancement for the animal welfare.
Yeah, because otherwise, I imagine you end up calling them, and because you don't have time, literally, to wait for a limping one if you have to milk 100 or 85 cows.
And we've done it many times. They're very slow, and it really works on your patience, I can tell you that much.
Zen master by herding cows, And so you met at Fresh, you go into this deep dive of, we actually didn't get to you, Chris. How did you hear about Fresh? How did you end up in the old swimming pool, Blue City Tropicana in Rotterdam?
Yeah, so I was obviously working at Halter, moved back to the Netherlands. I was working there for a wee while, remotely from the Netherlands, but I ended up just wanting to do something with my skills that was more focused on helping the world solve its problems, I guess.
And you didn't feel like you didn't feel like you were doing that enough at Halter? Because it sort of seems like you were in the center of at least change and a big lever.
Yeah, I felt I could do that more on my own. So, yeah, that's what led me to Fresh. I actually also just ended up getting a message from Bart in my inbox in LinkedIn. But I'd already was moving on from Halter at that time and was searching for what I wanted to do next. And then this came Fresh Ventures came up, and I was like, oh, this is perfect for me. I'm really interested. I know a lot about the agricultural space. I have skills here that can be of use. So let's do it. And that's where me and Daniel met.
And you went into a deep dive on the food system. I mean, you were already deep into that. And was it logical for you to start another virtual fencing company from scratch? Because Halter you joined later, but I'm asking an open question. I know the answer. But was it logical for you to jump in the animal space again?
Well, actually, my initial attitude towards it was I'm going to try and avoid it. I'm like...
That went really well. We're looking basically next year where we're recording, we're looking at all the hardware stuff and some early models and some later models and a lot of people building things. So congrats with that.
No, but I wanted to, I guess, keep an open mind and explore what I think was the best route for me to take, or best way that I could have influence. And I was trying not to be blinded by necessarily going back into virtual fencing and animals in general. And there was also, for me personally, there was a phase where I was unsure about the animal's role in...
I remember that phase.
In the agricultural system.
We've emailed and had conversations about that.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the more I dug into it and the more research I really did and the more kind of arguments I listened to either the way, I became more convinced of that animals do have a positive role that they can play in the food system. And I think that positive way is significantly different to the way we do it. A lot of it now.
Let's state very clearly, 99, I don't know what the number is, but they don't play that role at the moment, and we rob them from that opportunity, which is horribly wrong. What convinced you? I mean, Daniel can make a really good case, but who convinced you, like why? Because we had those conversations when I was hanging out at Fresh and with the first cohort, which we happened to be around a lot at that time. And I remember those conversations, and I remember... you really trying not to get pulled back into the animal side and the virtual fencing piece. And I remember asking you, is it as magical as it sounds? I think at that time we might have done no fence as an investment. I don't remember. But at least we were looking at it. And I've done fence before as a personal small investment. And you said, yes, if done well, it is that magical. And I'm like, why didn't you build another one then? Because there's so many ruminants still. And you were really trying not to. What brought you back into that, apart from the convincing skills of Daniel?
Well, they helped, of course, for sure. I think at some point, I think the first question for me was, what is animals' role in the future of our agriculture system, and is it a positive one? Yeah, is there a role for them? And I finally came to the conclusion that I think there is. And the second one was like, well, you know what? How can I best use my skills and knowledge to have the biggest impact on the food system? And then when I answered that question, I realized, well, it's clearly using all of these skills that I've developed in the last 5 years.
There are not so many people that can say they have built cow guidance systems and know. I mean, there are many people I think that would recognize the potential, or quite a few that recognize the potential, like you did, Daniel, as well on virtual fencing, but then actually building hundreds and thousands of those devices and getting ruminants to do what we think they should do, which is different than they might want to do, but that's is very, very different. So then now, I mean, we've been talking about Collie for a bit sideways, let's say, present or I'm not saying pitch. I mean, you're raising funding, but what is Collie and what makes it different than others, or what makes it having already an interesting impact, even though you're still very young? I think you're almost 1 year in, or just 1 year in?
We're officially 1 year since Friday, since the 8th of March.
So we're recording this the 11th, just for people to... So congratulations. That's why the champagne glasses are there. No, they're washed, people. They're clean, don't worry. This is Monday morning. So what is Collie 1 year in, or what is Collie now when you describe to somebody here in an elevator, because we're in a tech incubator. Of course, everybody's having an impact, quote unquote, but you're doing things a bit different, and you're doing hardware. So what do you describe when you have to present yourself here, or you're on the stairs, or at the coffee place?
Chris and I met at Fresh, where we learned about the food system and saw that it really needed to change. And we also learned that if we want to feed 10 billion people sustainably in 2050, we need to bring back the balance between animals and plants. We need to restore that balance, because otherwise we cannot feed 10 billion people. I would even say
relationship. Let's double click on that. But I think that relationship has been broken.
Yes,
we literally separated it.
Yes,
and that's one of the issues. But why did you decide to focus on that relationship? Because also it could be soil and trees, or food and people. Like all of those relationships have been broken in the last 50 years or more.
Well, I guess Chris and I both have a certain love for animals. I have my own border collie, for example. We've both worked with animals, Chris more extensively than I did. Especially during my time at MoMA and at the nature restoration farm, I learned how impactful the industry is in a negative way, but also if you look at nature restoration, how important animals are in building soil, in creating biodiversity, in improving the landscape. So that's where I felt the urge, like it's such an impactful industry. I even been vegan for a few months.
So you were going to say for a few years, a few months. Okay. What brought because I think it was going to be a question I was going to ask before, like your friends, if they're still friends, and ex-colleagues at Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion, there is this tendency, and I think we talked about it as well, Daniel, before, but there's this, it's starting to change a bit, but this tendency, by definition, especially ruminants, are bad, and white meat is better, and if we only look at the efficiency ratio, don't start writing people, I know those are wrong. But what do they think now of what you're doing at Collie?
I cannot read mine, so I'm not fully sure.
But from what you hear, what you see, what you feel.
But I guess the first reaction is often like, whoa, okay, intense, a bit like surprised is I think the right word. And but also and I think that also was with me, with the reason I decided to become vegan is because the industry is so impactful and so bad for both the animals and the environment. But when I explain what Collie can bring to that industry and how it's disruptive to that industry and how it's letting cows graze outside more, making them more grass-fed, incorporating them more with nature. That's when they understand that it's actually a real good thing. To like the first reaction people have about, for example, the dairy industry, oh, dairy animals, it's bad, and they take off their hands. But I think we need to do the total opposite. We need to grab it and see, okay, it's such a big industry, it's so impactful, we're gonna eat meat and eat dairy products if we like it or not. So how can we actually change that industry? And I think that's where Chris and I both felt with virtual fencing and cow guidance, we can really bring that change we would like to see.
Okay, so let's talk. How does Collie do that? And in the dairy industry in the Netherlands, to start with, which is known to be super efficient, extremely intensive. If you're in a train somewhere, you go from, I don't know, Amsterdam to the south, you see a lot of green fields, green pasture, which is mostly monoculture ryegrass, very heavily fertilized. Yeah. So there are some issues, let's say there. It's very also energy and fossil fuel use intensive. Yeah. And you're coming in there sort of as a wedge and say, okay, it needs to be more grass-fed, grass use as pasture use. How does Collie do that or enable that as an enabling tech?
So even though like in New Zealand it's more grass focused, here it's very milk focused. So how many liters does my cow produce? But there are many farmers in the Netherlands that are already grazing their cows outside as much as possible, doing strip grazing, like regenerative grazing practices. So there already are, I would say, the early adapters of the right way of farming.
Yeah, I remember when Joel Salatin came to the Netherlands for the first time, and there was a lot of interest. There is a lot of interest. I think there has been always a branch of farmers that have been like denying this energy and input intensive way, like that doesn't make sense because there is a limit somewhere. Yeah. And how do you target those specifically because they are the most advanced? A bit like in New Zealand, they embrace tech easier because it can make them do something that they cannot do or more difficultly do without?
Well, regenerative farming and regenerative grazing is just very complex and a lot of work. And I think with Collie, we want to take away that complexity and take away that labor, making it more simple and easy. And if the idea is that if we can help these farmers now already with making their life more easy, with improving the grazing practices, there's also a lot of farmers that are signed up for a product that are not doing strip grazing or regenerative grazing now, but they will once they have our system. So,
I think one of the reasons that Northern Europe, the Netherlands and Northern Europe in general, has become so non-grazing focused and input focused is because of the labor savings that having your cows inside actually
and having
provides.
the feed come in.
Yeah, exactly. It actually makes it possible to manage those farms with low labor. But when we come along and we take away the labor need the labor requirements for actually grazing in a good way, we believe we unlock the possibilities for that to happen. And also I think there's a big push towards more grazing in the Netherlands and Europe more widely because people are starting to see the downsides of, bringing in soy from Brazil and over-fertilizing and all of these issues. And
we've tackled
also the welfare side of having animals locked inside all the time.
I mean, it's sort of crazy if you think about it. You're fertilizing your pasture, which many farms still have. It's not that they only rely on soy they bring from outside. You're fertilizing your pasture, you're harvesting it with machinery that take diesel and compact your soil. You're bringing it into cows that have perfect forelegs, and if they're not limping, they can do that themselves and fertilize by themselves. Plus, methane, we now know, is way lower when they're actually on pasture. Plus, like all the other, simple because we optimized for one thing, which is milk, and reduced the labor input, which was the most expensive in this system. And we disconnected all of that. And getting that out there again, because I remember having an interview with Rumi and how much trouble they had if talking about grazing with farmers in Germany, because they're originally from Denmark and Germany, and they went to the UK at the end because there was much more of a grazing culture compared to Germany. Like our cows need to be inside by definition, of course. Why not? And they just couldn't break through that yet. Of course, at some point it will happen, etc. But that mindset of inside, bringing the feed in, and the pasture is for dumping manure, more or less. that's a very disconnected worldview. And so you're targeting the ones that, of course, want to do more if labor would be less of an issue. And Collie, I mean, just to describe it visually, it's a collar around every cow.
Yeah.
Plus what? Like, what does it enable me to do if I'm already, let's say, an advanced dairy farmer here in the Netherlands? I get 50 of those for my cows. What does it enable me to do that I couldn't do before?
Yeah, so you can now, from your smartphone, anywhere in the world, but let's say your kitchen table, you can graze your cows and do strip grazing practices, which is a good way of grazing. Because if you graze your cows, you want to have them rotate a lot, and you want to rotate them every few hours, and you want to make sure they're dense together, and then make sure that they don't go back to the grass for a while, because that's the way nature intended it. That's how cows used to graze.
Which is absolutely not how we graze now. Let's be
Exactly,
very clear.
yeah.
We leave the cows in their open space and
Yeah.
they can overgraze whatever they want. What we want to do is concentrate as much as possible, have the herd mentality and the herd impact, and then don't come back to the same spot for a while. But if you're saying every couple of hours, that's like a time suck if you have to move the fencing, even with electric fencing. I've seen some rolling advantages, some things, but
it will save you up to 3 hours a day, which is a lot.
Which is massive,
Yeah.
apart from all the other benefits of graze, etc. And then how does it fit into, because we often talked about the fencing or the virtual fencing and not having fencing in the livestock situation. Why is dairy different? Because you need to come to a dairy shed every 2-3 times a day.
Exactly,
how does that integrate into the dairy part of the ruminant side?
So with dairy, you need to move your cows at least 2 times a day to the milking shed. And with a milking robot, you need to do it 3 times a day. And this is also a lot of labor work, which you now can do with cow guidance. But get a bit back to the grazing bits, that if you see your neighbor now grazing their cows, strip grazing them regeneratively, they can see they get happier and healthier cow. They get more grass yield, which is saving on feed. And then indeed with the milking robot, for example, where you can increase your milk yield also up to 15% by
15 people, not 50.
15%, yes, by having them going more often to the milking robot, then for the neighboring farmer that is not grazing their cows properly, it is a no-brainer to start doing the regenerative grazing practices. And we see that as a first step. So first we want to have cows outside grazing regeneratively.
And how much more can they be outside compared to the standard? Just to give people an understanding, how much is a cow on average inside versus outside in the Netherlands, and how much is actually possible if you take away that labor piece?
So in the Netherlands, 25% of cows are inside 100% of the time.
But that's not the farmers you're targeting.
That's not yet.
Unfortunately.
Not yet.
That would be the biggest deal. Okay, so 25%.
Eventually we would love to have those cows outside, because that's what we're trying to do, of course.
Yeah, but even the farmers that do put their cows outside, they don't put them out for very long.
No.
There's I think
80%.
80% of them put their cows out, a minimum of 720 hours, which is not very many hours. So in order to get like the stamp of the cows
license
that go outside on the milk, they only have to be outside for 720 hours,
Which
when they
is
could
nothing.
be outside for more than 3,000 hours.
At least.
Over.
Wow. Okay, that's 5x. Okay, yeah. And you're saying labor is the biggest
Yes.
headache there too.
Yeah. So a lot of farmers don't put their cows outside because of the labor, because also less control. Because if you feed them in the barn, you know exactly what they eat and how much.
Yeah, and also in Europe, the farmers have lost that knowledge as well.
Grazing knowledge is
Yeah.
observing pasture, understanding where and how. How do
Exactly.
you enable that with
Well,
Collie?
I think that's also where we see our application coming in, being able to actually guide farmers and visually show them data and visually give them suggestions, etc., on how to graze more effectively as well.
Yeah. So first step grazing, second step impact data and incentives through their app, because they're using our app on a daily basis, several times a day. So that's also a great place where we can try to incentivize the farmer to go beyond grazing cows regeneratively outside. That's where we hope to incentivize them to also apply for certain subsidies or ecosystem services. You have now the big topic is nitrogen, right? Everyone's talking about nitrogen.
In the Netherlands.
In the
let's be clear.
Netherlands, sorry. Yeah.
Nitrogen is a hot topic because we for a few decades, just as a bit of context, ignored some very important European rules and laws about nitrogen. Thought we could get away with all kinds of technology fixes. And it turns out we can't. You can't outsmart nature. At some point, the levels just get too bad, and somebody will literally bring you to court and stop it. And so nitrogen is a big issue in dairy. Just in 2 sentences, why is it such a big issue, and what can Collie or virtual fencing or more grazing outside? Why can it make an impact on nitrogen? Why is it such an important one for you?
Well, I mean, the reason that it's an important one, I think, is because, it's one of dairy's areas where it has the biggest impact, especially when cows are grazed, not grazed and are inside a lot. So what happens is when manure and urine mixes together, which happens in the basement of the shed. You get a reaction that causes a lot of ammonia, which is actually quite a noxious gas. If you go underneath there, you die, basically.
Yeah, it's the smell we all know you want to stay away from.
Yeah. And that breaks down into, first can cause over-fertilization of natural areas, and also it breaks down into nitrous oxide, which is a highly potent greenhouse gas.
So you never want to mix manure and urine.
Exactly.
Which doesn't happen when they're grazed, I'm assuming. Yeah.
When the cows are in the field, it happens very little. The cows pee and piss in different times in different spaces, and if the soil is healthy, it's also absorbed very quickly into the soil.
Is that notion getting more known now? Like, it's not just about getting a better filter or separator in my barn, in my shed, so that the urine doesn't mix with it. And the notion of, if the soil is healthy, which is a big if, and they're grazing outside, actually you take care of most of this?
It's starting to get more traction, I think. You're starting to see more and more research, Wageningen University is starting to kind of really promote this kind of thing.
Which is ironic, because they were the biggest promoter of everything inside, feed as much imported corn and soy as possible, and get big or get out. Yeah, and which is great. I mean, I'm shout out to Wageningen for changing some of that practices now.
Yeah, and in the Netherlands, it's a huge political issue, right? It's even discussed in Parliament. There's
even a minister of nitrogen.
Yeah, but does he or she, like, that's the question? But it's like, is that knowledge again of healthy soil plus healthy grazing takes care of most of that? Is that also discussed in Parliament, or it's more like, this nitrogen headache issue needs to go away? Let's throw a lot of money at it.
I think it's not there yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying we just need to remove the number of cows, which I think it would be good if we reduce the number of cows for sure.
Especially in the Netherlands.
Yeah, because the land it actually can't support the amount we have. But if we have a healthy amount, then it's going to be good. And yeah, by having cows outside, the maximum that you can, you're reducing the nitrogen emissions by like more than 60%. So
that's massive.
It can have a huge impact on the environment, but climate change as well. Not just the quality of the water, but also the actual global warming issue. Yeah.
And you're saying, like, potentially integrating that more into the app or into the service as ecosystem services, as more of these things are going to be rolled out, not just buying out farmers, but reducing or some kind of grazing plus premium, more than the 700 hours you mentioned before.
Yeah, so I think incentivizing grazing is what we see as our first big step to really making an impact on the dairy industry or the animal agriculture industry in general. But what we see as our vision is, like Daniel alluded to earlier, is bringing back that balance between the plants and the animals, right? Bringing that back into the way, kind of more like nature intended it, let's say, where the animal was part of the whole system, right? Where, a natural forest is like the most productive place that you can productive land that you can have, basically, and that's because of the diversity of all the different organisms in that, right?
And because of disturbance of large animals,
Yeah.
mammals, etc.
And-
Like if
and
you
the-
take that out,
Yeah, they play a big role in that. So our vision is to kind of, I guess, get as close as you can to that. That's realistically possible. You know, we see, a vision for our application, our system to actually enable the integration of animals into a more diverse agricultural system.
beyond pasture, basically. That's what you're
Beyond
saying.
just pasture, yeah. So, for example, agroforestry or crop rotations, natural areas as well, having natural spaces within the farm. So, keeping the animals away from the waterways is another one that you can do very easily at the push of a button with our system, right? Grazing being the first step and kind of unlocking complex, diverse systems where animals are integrated into that food system are kind of grand vision.
Yeah, because fencing there, I think, is a big fencing and labor. Like I think there are many arable farmers doing complex rotations, cover crops, and then having actually massive issues of pushing the cover crop down or not spraying it and killing it. All kinds of rototillers and whatever we invented to do that. Well, it's sort of a natural feed for ruminants if you would be able to keep them on the field and keep them like strip grazing over a cover crop field. And that's like with a push of the button, of course, more complex than that. But it's much easier than getting a bunch of fencing in and animals as well into an area or into a place of a farm where they're just not used to handle animals. It's a very different, quote unquote, literal beast than if you're doing a normal crop rotation. So the integration of that would, and for sure dairy farms or livestock farmers would be interested in that if it's nearby, if it's logistically possible, etc. Diverse feed, you don't have to pay for it. You might get paid for the grazing and the manure you bring into a certain in a certain way. For sure, there are all kinds of laws and regulation that don't allow you to do that. And coming back a bit to where we are, which is the city center of Amsterdam. Let's say we're going to the Zuidas, which is the financial heart of this tiny country, and we are on stage there. We do it in a similar fashion as here, but then with a large audience. And they're all financiers. They're people that work with their money or other people's money. What would be the main message you would like to give them? Of course, they're enthusiastic. They're interested now. They have an understanding of virtual fencing, etc. But if we also have a short memory and attention span, if you want them to remember one thing, if there's one seed you would like them to remember the next day when they go to work and they maybe change something, what would be the main seed or the main thing to remember from a fun evening talking about the role of animals in agriculture?
So the role of animals in agriculture, right?
Or in general, like we've talked about, let's say we have done this on stage, we talk about an hour plus, we maybe seen a documentary or something like that. So we're enthusiastic about regen, enthusiastic about the space, but of course, you cannot remember everything from the evening. If there's one thing you want them to remember from that, and one thing you want to give them to bring home, let's say, what would that be?
Yeah, so I would say we need animals in order to feed the planet sustainably. So we should stop taking our hands off animal agriculture, and we should put all our money, time, effort into making it more sustainable and making it more regenerative and making sure that animals are used in a way that is symbiotic with plants and nature, to make sure that we go from monoculture to a diverse regenerative landscape where both nature, crops and animals can thrive and enhance and support each other.
I think it's an interesting, I don't know if we're coming out. I don't know if you feel that too. I mean, you mentioned it off, I was going to say off camera, but we don't have cameras, off microphone before, that we're coming a bit out of this, animals are bad phase. Do you sense that as well? Is it like, because for 5 to 10 years, like it was really, really strong, even though not all the evidence, but a lot of evidence suggests that there is a role, but it really depends if we take that role properly and guide and facilitate. Do you sense it's slightly changing as well? Because I'm imagining you have to explain this 10,000 times a day. Like, is it changing, or are we still early on?
It's early, but it is changing, I would say. I was, for example, in an event, a regenerative egg event a year ago, where I was together with one poultry farmer, the only animal representative. So, and then what is it? 2 weeks ago, I was at RFSI in Brussels, where it was really at the forefront. Like, hey, we have been ignoring the role of animals, and we really should start bringing the animal back into regen ag, and that's for me very motivating as well, because I see this shift now, going from animals are bad to, hey, actually they bring also a lot if used right.
And we can't ignore it. I think the role, it's too big, like you said before. It's not that we're going to change our diet. We've tried over time in next few years, which we have to if we wanted to reach that. So either we embrace it and really start changing, because it needs drastic change, or what are we doing?
Yeah, the thing is, animals are bad as they are, as the animal agriculture as it is now is horrible.
Yeah, so the intention of the vegan community is not like the solution might not be the solution that's gonna fly, but the intention is very...
Yeah, but I think there is a role for animals in a positive way in the food system.
Would that be your message as well if you would sit in front of an audience? Let's do another message. What would be your main seed you want to plant in front of a financially minded, focused audience if we do an evening on Collie?
Yeah, I think it would be similar to what Daniel said, in that I think it's really important that we unlock that diverse system, and animals and plants can support each other symbiotically, right? Like you mentioned already, when you eat cover crops, when you put the cows on the cover crops, they put biology into the soil, and that improves the soil for the next round of crops. And then, as a result, you get this bonus extra production from your animals. So, in that way, the crops and the animals are supporting each other, and it's a win-win for both. And I think that's how the system can look in multiple different areas. So I would say, but the biggest problem with that, I think, is that it's labor intensive. The problem with complexity is good for the health of the system as a whole, but it's bad for the humans managing it. And I think we need to come up with solutions that help us manage that in a labor efficient way.
So it would almost be like an investment strategy. Like, what is the role of technology in regen? A lot of people ask, some of these myths are regen is anti-tech or anti-science. I think that's absolute nonsense, but the tech piece makes a lot of sense if it enables farmers to hold more complexity on their land.
Yeah, and I think for the last 50 years, we've used technology to do the opposite, right? We've used technology to decomplexify it, make it more monoculture. And I think it's important that we now make sure that the technology is bringing back that balance rather than taking it away.
There are two super fundamental pieces there: the decomplexification, or the complexification with more and better and more suited technology, and the animal piece you made of. I think we shouldn't underestimate. Benedict Beuzel, one of the farmers on stage at RFSI, the first day, which you weren't at, but he opened with, with that exact point, animals are part of my rotation. I have about 300 of them. And actually, it's not only they bring biology, it's very different than passing with a tractor that costs money instead of an animal that actually, if you do well, I can sell for money, and has flexibility in cash flow, because when I have a bad year or a bad moment, I can sell 30 of the cows and I'm fine. Like, it's also a walking, increasing asset, but it's a walking asset and a bank account. And I think for finance people, it's like thinking in those models, or start to imagine, like, it's very different than a real estate asset. It's very different than a car. It's very different than like soil, animals, trees, etc. With the right management, facilitation, etc. Grow over time and get while you're actually harvesting from a system, which sort of shouldn't make sense in our economic system, but it should fit in an Excel sheet at some point. But we have to change some accountancy rules. But that brings us to another question I love to ask. that you know, if you've been listening to the podcast, if you had $1 billion or €1 billion, or in Europe here, what would you focus on? I'm not looking for exact euros amount. But I'm interested, especially from operators like yourself in the space. Of course, you would finance Collie. You're raising money. I understand. But beyond that, what else would you do if you had a significant amount of money to put to work? So this is an investment amount. But what would you do if you had to put quite a lot of money to work in the space, in, let's say, the food and egg space as a whole? Could be very broad as well.
Yeah, well, I think following on from my previous answer, I would invest a lot of it in technology that unlocks complexity and makes it.
Do you have any ideas? Like other beyond virtual fencing, what are other technologies that you as an engineer gets you excited?
Yeah, I think one big one is the whole circular nutrients problem. I think at the moment we have a very linear way that we look at the nutrient cycle, and that's in and out the other end. I think if we can find ways of bringing back all of the nutrients that goes to waste in our system, whether it's through from food waste or from animal waste or from
toilets,
food,
flushing,
all sorts. Yeah, exactly. I think that's really interesting and incredibly important. And I think, being an engineer, also, I think probably technology that helps with on the farm directly. Like, I'm thinking nut picking machinery and machinery that helps you manage a farm that has a lot of different productive systems going on. Like, you've got nuts here, you've got fruit here, you've got grains here, you've got animals here, blah, blah. If anything that can help make that more labor efficient, I think is very interesting.
Very, very important. And we just might be out at this time, maybe not. Anyway, on syntropic agroforestry, and the biggest issue there is manual labor, or potentially biggest opportunity, because we're going to figure out machinery to harvest, to prune, if we can put a device on the moon. I mean, we could do this. We could harvest walnuts in a certain way. We could, if there's enough demand, if there's enough smart engineers building that kind of machines, and not just bigger, heavier tractors that drive themselves, but get way, I don't know how much, to compact soil.
Yeah, well, they need to be able to deal with the complexity. That's the thing. And that's why human labor is so good, because it can deal with complexity, right?
Do you think we're getting there now with the advances of technology, and also getting cheaper and image recognition? It's like there seems to be there's a virtual fencing boom because of technology makes it possible. Do you see a similar thing? In a few years, more of this complex machinery should be able. We see some robotics. We had Clint Bauer on the call as well, on the podcast before, because you come out of robotics originally. Do you get excited, or are you still?
I'm very much an optimist in this sense. I think we have to, right? I think we have to build those things because if we don't end up with the food system that we want.
It's not necessarily is it possible now, but I think a lot more is possible than a couple of years ago. I think if you look at batteries even, and just cloud-based and connectivity and
it's hard to predict these things, because I think it can all of a sudden you have a big breakthrough and it unlocks a whole bunch of stuff. But I think in general you have the process where there's kind of a whole bunch of excitement about a technology, and then you have the bit of a bust about it, and then actually the technology comes and really makes waves. So I think we're probably, for many technologies, we might be in that bump, that whole
disappointment, or the trough of disillusion.
Exactly, where actually soon we might have technology starting to actually do good stuff. So, but like you say, battery technology, obviously AI is something that is able to deal with a lot of data and simplify that from high complexity to something that's manageable, which I think is probably a key unlocking technology in that sense.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation with Abby Rose, I will put it on, of Sector Mentor, a tech entrepreneur and farmer and very skeptical on tech in general and finance, but raised money and is building a very interesting tech venture in the space. And had an interesting insight on AI. We'll link that below as well. And you, Daniel, you had $1 billion to put to work.
Yeah,
what would you do?
I would invest it in mission-driven founders that have a disruptive technology in the pre-seed phase, probably, because it's a difficult phase. Because I think we need more purpose-driven people bringing disruptive technologies, and it's fine if like half of them fail, but it would be great if half of them succeed and we're really changing this agricultural system from mono to poly and bringing back the diversity in the landscapes we desperately need.
You specifically say tech.
Yeah.
How broad is your definition of tech? Like what would be things, even they don't exist yet, but what would be things you would love to invest in if you had that capability?
I have like two things in my head. One is more the data side. So I think I hope that the satellite data will improve immensely, because I think with Collie could also use that a lot with for example, deciding how much grass is in the field and making sure that the cows get exactly what they need, or making sure we have more herb-rich grasslands. I think you can do a lot with satellite data, for example. So one on the data side, I think we need more data that incentivizes good behavior. So that's on one side. And on the other side, what Chris said is the labor saving, taking the complexity out of out of diversity, making things more easy. Because I think that's what keeps us from actually doing the important work. It's just very complex and very labor intensive. So we need to solve that part in order to bring back the balance between animals and plants we so desperately need.
Yeah, so please reach out if you're building that. Not saying we have $1 billion here to spend, but we might have some investors that are interested in that. If you're building tech to enable and to bring back complexity and to connect the relationships that have been broken, definitely reach out. And then as a final question, which is never a final question, but if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing in the food and ag space, could be as broad as it was. Like I've heard answers, might have been me, but like better tasting buds so we can actually taste the difference, all the way to all subsidies gone tomorrow, to farmers that actually understand their soil or get out of their tractor, to anything. So feel free to go very wide or very narrow. What would it be if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing overnight?
Yeah, I think you might have heard a similar answer before, but for me, it's like if we could account for every, externality or every actual impact that we're causing, both positive and negative, in a way. Again, the problem is it's so complex that when you try and account for every data point, you just end up with too much information.
But you have a magic wand, so you can make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. So if I had the magic wand, I would make it possible that we could account for every external factor, and then actually bring that into, our actual accounting. Because if you started to measure that, we're able to measure that stuff and actually reported upon it to externals, to public, et cetera, I think there will be a huge motivation for people to actually start changing things, because when you
think that transparency, like look under the hood, would unlock a lot.
Yeah, I think so, because I don't know if you've ever built a financial model or something, but then when you start to actually put numbers in, and then you realize where you're spending things on, where you start to go, oh, actually, wow, that is something that can be changed.
I remember Puma, I think the fashion brand did this is quite a few years ago, did a financial loss statement or a profit and loss statement, and then including externalities, and they were horribly unprofitable. But they published it, which was very courageous to say, like, actually, if we counted for all the costs,
but if everyone had to.
Yeah. So you would probably, your magic wand would force everybody, whatever way you can figure it out, but you have to publish. You have
exactly,
to.
Yeah.
And you, Daniel?
I'm a real people's person, and I say power to the people. And I think that we as the people can really shape the world. So I would say...
I see the Extinction Rebellion and Greenpeace voice coming back. Very good. We need that, because I think we're, not activist enough.
So I would say that we as people should want grass-fed butter, grass-fed cows,
and finished. I hear the people in the back. Yeah. Not just like a few days. Okay. So.
And also fruit and vegetables without pesticides, and food from farms like Mark Shepard or the Biggest Little Farm, where nature, animals, and crops are integrated in a symbiotic way. I think if we all as people want that, and we want to fight for it, and we want to eat it, and we want to pay for it, then the system has to change.
And so what's holding us back? Because I think we've seen many places, or maybe we've seen the documentaries. I feel it's also almost like a narrative, or almost like we cannot believe food could look like that. Like we sort of are in this mindset of like that can never be productive enough, or it can never that can never scale, or it can never feed the world, and all of that. Like what's holding us back to believe that a food system actually could look like that?
I think several things. Firstly, and maybe most importantly, what you eat is very important to how you feel and how healthy you are. So I would say, like, if people can see that if they eat food without pesticides, and that's with lots of nutrients in there, and from healthy soil, it really will change your personal health. And I think health is important. So that's one side. Two, we indeed need proof that it's possible. And I think we can arrange that by making it easy, like a system with like Collie, like making it easy to graze your cows outside, having them in a diverse system.
And making sure your neighbor, that you can see it at the neighbors. I think that's for farmers at least, because otherwise there's always the argument, which is partly true. Like I have different circumstances. My context is different. Of course, it's nice what they do in Canada. It's amazing what they do in Australia or New Zealand or in Italy. But I can never do it here because X, Y, Z, etc. But if your neighbor does it, suddenly that argument disappears.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you, guys, both of you, so much. I have 10,000 other questions, but we're getting up to lunchtime and we're getting up to time as well. This has been a fascinating interview. Thank you for the work you're doing in the space, for going through the pre-seed, getting into hardware, getting back into the animal side of things, Chris, and putting most of your awake hours into getting animals outside and doing what they should be is not the right word, what they ought to be doing, or what we would like them, we, meaning the general we as humanity and the planet, want them to do, which is graze and add a lot to biodiversity and our ecosystems. So thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. For the show notes and links we discussed in this episode, check out our website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/posts. If you like this episode, why not share it with a friend or give us a rating on Apple Podcasts? That really helps. Thanks again, and see you next time.